We got
So yeah, hey y'all, welcome to our intro to the Farm Bill brief introduction. This is kind of like a 101, and we're going to start having some more in-depth trainings this fall. And yeah, I'm Brett. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the administrative contractor with the coalition. So when you get emails from the coalition listserv, they are probably from me. And yeah.
And where are you based, Brett?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm in Alamance County, so right in the Piedmont.
Nice, wonderful. And I'm Jared. Kate's also going by Jalen Cates, using all pronouns. I'm the policy director at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, which is based in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. And I'm based in Orange County, right next to Brett, in the Piedmont in North Carolina. And we're excited to be with you all today. This is a last minute addition that we did a summer Farm Bill series with the coalition that was so popular and in high demand that we were asked to do a final one. So we're doing this, as Brett mentioned, this last kind of Farm Bill 101. And then as the Farm Bill moves forward after the election, we're going to be doing some further deep dives into additional marker bills and as the process evolves. So we're excited to share this 101 with you all as kind of a farewell to the summer and into the fall, and looking into this winter after the election for Farm Bill next steps. All right, Brett, let's kick us off.
Yay, yeah. So we are going to be talking about the Farm Bill quite broadly today. Again, as you'll learn, this is a huge bill with a lot to unpack. So it will take the whole hour, 45 minutes time for questions just to scratch the surface. But something we want to prioritize right in the beginning. Oh, well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself really quick to talk about what the coalition is. We were a group of folks in these 4 issue areas. We call them our buckets. The first is environmental justice and agriculture, using agriculture as climate mitigation, right? And preventing the kind of carbon negative, or I guess we want carbon negative farming, but climate detrimental farming. Food security and nutrition is also a key issue area for us. Local supporting farm workers and farmers, and then local food system markets and infrastructure. So making sure that farmers and the food system has the infrastructure to be successful, because we know that as much as one person wants to make a difference, it is really hard if you don't have the tools. So we want to kind of preface this whole training by addressing the foundation of structural racism that is part of the Farm Bill. It's really important to talk about what the Farm Bill has never addressed, which is the fact that the United States food system is built upon stolen land, stolen from indigenous people, and then cultivated by forced labor of enslaved African people. And it's not ancient history, right? We know that the effects of this are still very prevalent in our world today. The Farm Bill has never addressed the structural racism, but it has to actually, enact change. There are also current federal policies, including those in the Farm Bill, that still actively favor white farmers, not just structurally, but we also know that there are issues of individual racism in terms of being awarded grants and other types of resources. So this will come up again, but as we talk about different parts of the Farm Bill, we always want to be keeping racial justice at the front of our minds, because at every turn in the program, there's a way to sneak in a loophole to prioritize white farmers. And we really want to make sure that we are, keeping the racial justice and equity in the front of our brains.
Yes, and that's founding principle of the coalition is to engage in food justice on behalf of all folks marginalized by our food system. And so that's why we have decided as a coalition to work on the Farm Bill and to try and incorporate, justice into those aspects of those work through all the work on the Farm Bill. So why is there a Farm Bill? Let's get into the history a little bit. The original Farm Bill was really three separate but related bills that were enacted in the 1930s as part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. And the goals of those bills were to ensure an adequate food supply, to keep food prices fair for farmers and consumers, and to protect and sustain the country's vital natural resources. And all of this was in direct response to the economic and environmental crises of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And while the Farm Bill has changed a lot since the 1930s, its primary goals are very much the same today. And what's changed more than its goals is a bit more of what drives the modern Farm Bill process. Next slide. So let's think about the Farm Bill as a long freight train. If it wasn't for long freight train, it would have two powerful engines up front. That's why this graphic is a little askew. I keep meaning to add another engine to the front of this thing, but it would have two engines on the front of this train if the Farm Bill was a train. And one of those engines, which has been going since the 30s, would be programs that support growing different staple, non-perishable, and generally storable commodities. Think corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, peanuts, sugar, cotton, dairy, beans, other products that you can dry and store. And so in its modern form, the Farm Bill, that commodity engine would also include crop insurance and different types of subsidies. So think of that as one engine driving this Farm Bill train. The second engine, also running from the start since the 30s, but also growing in power over the past 50 years, are the federal nutrition programs, especially the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which is previously known as food stamps. And those engines pulling together have long ensured the broad, if not universal, support for the Farm Bill by rural, suburban, and urban legislators. Those two big engines, one supporting commodities and one supporting food access. And over the past 30 years, the Farm Bill has continued to expand. It's more than just that. And today, conservation programs could rightly be considered a third engine of the Farm Bill due to the large amount of funding and its importance as more farmers adapt to and hopefully begin to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So to complete the metaphor, the other Farm Bill titles, there's 12 titles in this last Farm Bill, like trade, energy, rural development. They would all be the individual cars of the nice long Farm Bill train, and the miscellaneous title, the 12th title, would then be the caboose. And those cars are all incredibly important. They are all funding incredibly important programs for community food system development, for supporting farmers, for supporting communities and rural communities, etc. But those cars maybe would not go anywhere without those two or three large engines pulling the process along and creating political traction along the way. So this is something, it's a very specific thing. The Farm Bill is an interesting beast, kind of unique in legislation. And while the agriculture committees in both the Senate and the House, they can both kind of deal and trade in specific subjects and freestanding legislation, they like to put a lot of their work together into the Farm Bill because it provides a predictable opportunity for them to comprehensively deal with issues. It creates opportunities for them to trade votes around on that train and build support over things that they want, build political capital over things that they need to happen, and reduces the authorizing work done by the committee in the intervening years, which lets them focus on rulemaking and regulatory processes. Basically, it makes their congressional processes easier and more streamlined so they can do more work. So that's the Farm Bill as a train. Without those engines, we might not have a lot of the wonderful things that the Farm Bill does for this country. So what exactly is the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is the principal federal legislation that creates and modifies farm, food, nutrition, and rural development programs. It basically sets the rules of the road for our nation's food and farm systems. Every day when you eat food, it is influenced by the Farm Bill. It influences what is grown by incentivizing the production of some crops over others. We talked about, commodities before, and fruits and vegetables aren't as incentivized in that system. It influences who grows it by determining who has access to capital, influencing who has access to land, and the management tools necessary to grow and produce food. It influences how food is grown and produced by supporting programs that reward some production systems over others. It influences what is done with those products and where they are sold by helping farmers process and add value to their crops, creating new market opportunities that they would not have had otherwise. It influences who can access and afford those goods. We mentioned SNAP. There are other federal nutrition programs in there. There are support for farmers markets and other food retail outlets. It greatly influences how we invest in rural communities beyond just agriculture and food. The rural title it has dozens of programs that support rural broadband, healthcare, community facilities, energy production, and more. Very important to states like North Carolina. It also influences what is done with products and where they are sold. So this is just a really big deal, and it's considered by Congress every 5 years. Like I said, giving them this periodic opportunity to create new policy and modify existing programs, and in programs that might be no longer relevant or useful. And really, very few bills receive this type of scrutiny on this kind of regular schedule. Child nutrition reauthorization is an exception. That actually expired way over its term, and is now finally coming up for reauthorization this year. So it is a similar bill, but doesn't get the type of attention that the Farm Bill does. And then the National Defense Authorization Act is really the only one other kind of bill that has this regular schedule. So it is an indication of how important the Farm Bill is to the health and function of our nation. It's usually several hundred pages long, and it ultimately establishes thousands and thousands of pages of rules and regulations. So it's a really big deal. Leaving a
So,
handprint.
oh, you said leaving a handprint. I mean, yeah, it's huge and there's so much in it. So kind of hard to unpack. It's very intimidating, but it's actually quite straightforward because most of the legislation, almost all of it, is authorizing language in the Farm Bill. So that means it contains text that creates or modifies programs. Sometimes the language is really specific, but it often glosses over certain complexities that then get sorted out later at the USDA. So putting on our racial justice and equity hats, we can be thinking about where can we add specific language to make sure that marginalized farmers are being able to receive these programs, or maybe that they're even targeting supporting marginalized farmers. So right away, we always want to again be having that like equity lens. The Farm Bill almost always includes language about how farm and food programs should work at some level. So this can be how long a program should continue, like if it's permanent or if it expires after a certain number of years. A really important thing to know is that the text will often define how a program is funded, which unfortunately is really the root of all of this, right? We need to have money to fund all these programs that are so important, and also money can fund programs that we do not support. So there are different types of funding. The funding can either be mandatory or discretionary. So mandatory is just what it sounds like. It's guaranteed to be funded every year. Discretionary means it's subject to congressional budgets and appropriations. That's determined every year. And that is, again, an area where things can sort of fall through the cracks. We can create loopholes. The Farm Bill often includes language about who can use a program, like eligibility criteria, definitions of different types of producers or farm practices, priority status, or enhancements for certain types of farmers. So, like, could have a program for new and beginning farmers, right? And in the case of grant programs, the Farm Bill also determines the maximum amount that can be awarded, which is it's important, right? So we don't give these big corporate farms way too much money, or also making sure that we have the length of the grant, and other things like whether you have to match funds, or if there's any restrictions, or like funding has to go to a certain type of part of a program, right? And the last thing I'll say about the funding is that it's important to know that not all the programs authorized in the Farm Bill are implemented right away. And sometimes they never come to fruition at all. So again, if they're given discretionary funding, the language is really vague, it can kind of get kicked down the can get kicked down the road and kind of just fall apart. So bills that we see as really important, we want to make sure that they are not given the opportunity for that to happen. So there are 12 titles in the Farm Bill, and again, we will not be going over all of them today. It would take us an hour to do a in-depth training on each individual title because there's so much in them. But basically, all the Farm Bill authorizing language is divided into the different sections, which is we call titles. There are a number of composition titles, and yeah, it's quite straightforward what they're able to do by their names. I love this graphic from NSAC, which is based on a quote from President Obama where he said, the Farm Bill is the Swiss Army knife of bills. And it's really true because it does have the ability to fund and start all these different programs from research to infrastructure to jobs, health and nutrition. We will be talking about some of these titles more specifically because they are so big, like Jalen had said, with being the engines, but every title is important and the Farm Bill is huge. So even if it's a small title, it's still big comparatively. And it's also important to note what's not in the Farm Bill. So the name kind of makes it seem like stuff like farm and food worker rights and public land grazing rights should be in the Farm Bill, but just because an issue is directly related to agriculture, it doesn't include them in the Farm Bill because they might fall outside the jurisdiction of the agriculture committees. And so they're instead considered under jurisdictions of other committees, so they can't be in the Farm Bill. So for example, farm worker rights and protections fall under the jurisdiction of the House Education and Labor Committee and the Senate Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee. So although we think of that as obviously like super related to the Farm Bill, it just doesn't fall under the same jurisdiction. Same goes for things with the FDA, WIC, although SNAP is involved. So yeah, a lot of the stuff, it seems like some mental gymnastics that it's not involved, but the root of it is that it has to fall under the agriculture committees in the House and the Senate. So the Farm Bill spending mostly goes to nutrition, as you can see. So Jalen was not kidding about that engine. Most of the spending goes to support SNAP and related nutrition programs, so that it obviously a huge engine. And then crop insurance, and commodity programs are next. Again, that is just like a huge part of how our country is run and our food systems and jobs and rural America. And so it's easier to sneak some bills in here because of how important these programs are. And like Jalen said, conservation is becoming a much bigger program as climate change becomes more severe and prevalent to us. And then the last remaining little slice of this map is all the other programs. So it is really wild. Other programs get just a sliver compared, but again, since it's such a large pie, it is still a good chunk of change.
Sweet, thanks, Brett. So we're not gonna bore you all with all 12 titles, but we are going to just mention 2 of the titles that we are featuring in this 101. And the first one is the conservation title. And the conservation title generally contains reauthorizations, amendments, and new programs that encourage farmers and ranchers to voluntarily implement resource conserving practices on their private land. So it's voluntary opt-in on their own land. And starting in 1985, farm bills have broadened their conservation agenda to include addressing multiple natural resource concerns. And so although the number of conservation programs has increased and the techniques to address These problems continue to emerge. The basic approach has remained unchanged. Provide financial and technical assistance to implement conservation systems supported by education and research grants. So basically, money from this title goes to support research on conservation, education on conservation, and then financial and technical assistance for farmers to implement conservation. So there are different types of programs within this title. There are working lands programs. These allow private lands to remain in agricultural production while implementing various conservation practices to address natural resource concerns. So this would include the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which folks may know if you're a farmer or work with farmers, the Conservation Stewardship Program, which is another large program accessed by farmers, and agricultural management assistance. There are also lands retirement programs. So as opposed to like keeping land in working agriculture, this is financial and technical assistance to take private land into temporary not production status in management to achieve conservation environmental benefits. So this is Conservation Reserve Program, which is another largely access program, some wetlands programs, some estuaries and rivers programs, and some soil health and land transition programs. So those are all about temporarily taking land out of production and for the environmental benefits that the natural and surrounding ecosystem receives. And then there are easement programs, which is long-term voluntary, restrictions on land use. So this is funding at the national level that is also used to support, state matching and easement programs, and that trickles down. I'm sure many of you know someone or maybe have some land and conservation easement in your community. And there's also other grants available for like prohibiting certain activities on federal lands, supporting federal lands. So it's a lot of money in programs to support conservation. So that's the conservation title that we want to share a little bit about, because after I share this next update on another title, we're going to share an update about how both of these are a little bit under attack right now in some Farm Bill conversations. So let's go to that next slide. And the next big title, which we've mentioned multiple times, it's one of the engines, is the nutrition title. And this title, contains SNAP, as we said several times, which is the main food assistance program in the United States. I mean, for most recipients, SNAP is meant to supplement a family's food budget. However, for nearly 4 in 10 households that receive food assistance, SNAP is the only way for families to buy the food that they need. So SNAP is one of the cornerstone food assistance programs of the early Farm Bill, and that has been really intrinsically linked with the early agricultural programs. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, if you work in food pantry or food bank, emergency food worlds, you've heard of this program, you've used this program. It's a means-tested federal nutrition program that purchases and distributes food to low-income Americans through emergency food providers like food banks in partnership with the USDA. So TFAP helps food banks augment the food they already provide for families in need. So TFAP, of the 4 billion meals distributed by Feeding America last year, around 600 million of those meals were provided by TFAP. So it's an important part of the emergency meals distributed through the food pantries and food banks. And then the Commodity Supplemental Food Program is a means-tested program for low-income seniors ages 60 and older, and it provides nutritious food to help supplement their diet and operates in all but one state. So this is just like a brief snapshot of the nutrition title. It's a big deal, and we mentioned both of these because maybe Brett can drop the link in. The Republican Study Committee, which is made up of, I think, 4 or 5 members of the House, put out their Blueprint to Save America, which is kind of their recommendations for budgets and for the Farm Bill. And they are recommending in the Blueprint to Save America that some of these conservation programs, CSP, CRP, are capped and not, have increased funding for, which is a concern of ours from the coalition. And then also with the nutrition title, the recommendation is to actually split the nutrition title, the nutrition programs from the Farm Bill and have it be its own separate legislation, with the desire of it becoming a block grant state match program. And so this is something else that is being billed as the biggest title. It's the biggest, it eats up the most money in the Farm Bill. It's being billed as a way to save money and to give states more control over how their federal tax dollars are spent on emergency feeding in their communities. And members of the coalition have all agreed that we do not think that's a good idea. Similar efforts were proposed in the last Farm Bill in 2018, and really caused some holdups in the House in their process over these disagreements over changing to SNAP programs and administration and funding. So this is kind of gearing up already when 4 or 5 Republicans in the House support this. We're already kind of seeing there might be some interesting discussions post-election as the House starts to draft their version of the Farm Bill, or starts to put out their draft version of the Farm Bill, early next year. So that's why we mentioned those 2 titles, because they are constantly under attack regardless. This is a specific attack this time around, but we have some other good news on conservation here later on. So let's keep it going, Brett. I think we wanted to show, so we wanted to give you a tool so that you can access information about other Farm Bill programs. So the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, of which Carolina Farm Stewardship Association is a member, Self-Help is a member, RAFI's a member. These are all members of this coalition. So members of our coalition are also members of this national coalition, and they're a wonderful national resource on agriculture and policy. And they created this great resource that is an overview of all Farm Bill programs and grants, and is really designed to support community food folks and farmers to understand what all these programs are and how can you access them, how can you find information about them, who do you need to contact at USDA. So it's a wonderful resource. But then for folks who are super policy wonks, or are trying to advocate for some of the stuff and you want to go even deeper into the weeds, they have all the information. So maybe let's click on the top one, Brett, the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. This is a program that Carolina Farm Stewardship Association has received in the past to help a beginning farmer training program that we were running. It's a wonderful program to support beginning farmers and support nonprofits that are working to cultivate beginning farmers. So you can see at the top, it shows the program basics like eligibility and action. So keep on scrolling down. These are all kind of like what the program is and how it works. Examples of projects that it has funded, how to apply. And then you get also down to program history, funding, and Farm Bill changes. And you can see here when this program was first created, it was first funded, and how it is continued to be funded through Farm Bill appropriations. So this is kind of the in 2018, it was merged together with another program, and it created more funding for us. So if you're someone who has benefited from this program, if you're a beginning farmer or were a beginning farmer and received some training or support from this program, knowing this information and being an advocate for it, it's just a great spot to go to have information for you yourself as a farmer in a food system, a person working in the food system, and also for advocates to know the full history of these bills, where they've come from, and so you can really strategize about how you want to engage in advocacy and have all the information that you need when you talk with folks about what you want to see. So I think Brett dropped the link in there. So I encourage you to, if you're a wonk or if you're a food systems person, you can spend a lot of time and you can see really the breadth of all the programs and all the many things that the Farm Bill is doing, and understand how it is really impacting our food system in so many ways. So I encourage you to take a look at that link.
Yeah. So who writes the Farm Bill? Farm Bill is written by members of Congress, like any other bill. Like we mentioned, it's the agriculture committees in either House of Congress. So in the Senate, it is the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, and in the House, it's the Agriculture Committee, which our Congresswoman Alma Adams is the vice chair of, I believe, and Congressman David Rouser is also on this committee. So we have two representatives in the House Ag Committee, and that is super powerful in North Carolina. Obviously, they also get input from other members of Congress, hearing witnesses, farm, food, and rural advocacy organizations, which is us, and voters as well. So even just one person reaching out definitely can make a big difference. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I think y'all probably know how bills get passed, but I think it's important to know that the Farm Bill is just like any other bill, except for how much money and how often we review it it has. But the Farm Bill is passed just like any other bill. And if you don't know how that happens, I highly recommend the Schoolhouse Rock video featured here. But yeah. And so we're going to talk now about marker bills. So basically, marker bills are introduced bills that are not meant to be passed on their own, but rather to be incorporated into larger legislation like the Farm Bill. And this is where most of our advocacy has been around, right? Because most folks in Congress are going to want to pass the Farm Bill. Again, it has these huge engines, these really big programs. But it's important to be able to put these bills that we see as really key to furthering our mission into the bill, or yeah, into the larger Farm Bill. So marker bills are really important because they can be the most effective way to introduce a new idea or improve an existing program. That's why we're working to advocate for marker bills and build momentum for them on a grassroots level. So the marker bills for 2023 have already been introduced. A lot of them we have been able to connect with legislators in North Carolina to sign on to, which is super exciting. And committees often solicit and consider ideas from groups like us about whether or not to support the marker bills. And so, yeah, we have a really cool opportunity with marker bills. And I'm going to pass it to Jalen to talk about some.
Thanks, Brett. And yeah, that's kind of where we are in the process right now. We'll share a little bit more at the end of where things are and what you can do. But where we are in the process is that for the past couple of years, bills have been being introduced that are marker bills for the Farm Bill. So we're going to mention a couple of them today. And then as we move forward this fall, and we do this kind of like Farm Bill 102 or 202, whatever it's going to be, will include information on other marker bills as well. So the first one is the Agriculture Resilience Act. This bill was introduced by Chellie Pingree. She is the only organic farmer in U.S. Congress. She lives on an island in Maine. And the goal of this act is to really support farmers in being climate heroes and leading to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And it lays out 6 concrete policy areas that farmers can really engage in to do that. And it lays out funding and programming to support existing programs of the Farm Bill and new programs. So it's all about investing in agricultural research to help give people the research they need to mitigate climate change, improving soil health, investing in existing programs that are already working at USDA to improve soil health and support farmers in doing that work, support farmland preservation, transition to pasture-based livestock, so some new programs on supporting producers and changing their livestock production practices, lots of money for on-farm renewable energy, and then money there for food waste. And the money for food waste isn't just for farmers. So maybe if you click on that Farmers Can Be Our Climate Heroes link, we can look a little bit at Chellie Pingree's page. And we'll talk a little bit more. Like some of this stuff is already getting funded and gaining traction. We'll talk more about that at the end. But this marker bill has proved to be a powerful tool to gain support around ways that farmers and communities can mitigate climate change. So if you keep on scrolling down, and you see all these specific ways that it's going to support that I just laid out. And then if you look at the food loss and waste, it would also standardize food date labeling, which we know is a big deal, and it's also a big deal for emergency feeding folks, and for causes confusion for everyone. And it would also create a new USDA program to reduce food waste in schools. So not only is this about agriculture and farmers, but it is broad and multi-sectoral. So the coalition has been meeting with folks, the congressional delegation in North Carolina about this, and has yet to get any sign-ons. So we don't have any representation from North Carolina delegation as co-sponsors to this act. So we need your support, and we need to continue to meet. And our goal is to hopefully get some North Carolina sign-ons to help gain some traction that these things are included in the Farm Bill next year. But we'll talk a little bit more about how some of that traction is already starting a little bit now. So that's ARA, the Agriculture Resilience Act. The next agriculture related marker bill that we're following closely and have been advocating for at the coalition is the Fresh Produce Procurement Reform Act. It's a lot of words in your mouth, FPPRA. And this main goal of this program is to create a new emergency food distribution program and model at USDA. USDA, and we all have learned a lot over COVID. We learned a lot that we learned how USDA buying large amounts of produce from large farms far away and trucking it into other states and giving away for free had some impacts that, while it was supportive for people in need, it had some impacts on food systems that were quite negative. So USDA, they improved their model over COVID, but this is about systematizing that improvement and making it even more better. So this would decentralize and help USDA build more relationships with smaller and more diversified producers, so that they can source from those folks in times of emergency, which will give them a better distribution network. And we saw how central and small localized distribution networks really were key during COVID. And this will connect those with USDA, giving the small and mid-sized producers, additional markets to sell through these USDA markets. So it's a program that really supports USDA dollars moving towards small, mid-sized BIPOC producers, while giving folks in need access to fresher food grown in their communities. So that is why we've been advocating and asking to get the delegation of North Carolina to support this act. And so far, we've gotten Congresswoman Alma Adams, who Brett mentioned, who's in the 12th district serving the Charlotte area. She has signed on as a co-sponsor, and her being a co-chair of the House Ag Committee, she is quite influential. So we hope that that helps to gain traction and be included in the upcoming Farm Bill. So FPPRA, please give folks a call and advocate to your congresspeople on behalf of those programs. Of that program, that act. And I think on the next slide, it's a very bipartisan, well-supported bill. Folks across the aisle, should be able to relate to this and be able to be a champion for it. So it's a great bill to even have as a first conversation. If you're first advocating with your congressional office for the first time, FPPRA is a great conversation opener to talk about Farm Bill with your congressional offices. All right, I think that's it for me for now.
Yes, and I'll say I remember that number because it's the last numbers of the phone number, and that's on 8675309. So that's the only bill I'll ever.
HR 5309.
It's the only bill that's easier to call by its numerical title, because the word title, it really trips me up. Anyway, I know we have some nutrition experts on the call, so we're lucky for that. But we're going to talk pretty briefly about some nutrition marker bills. And again, if y'all stay in touch, we will be doing some more in-depth trainings, yeah, as we go. But this Closing the Meal Gap Act basically is a nutrition focused marker bill that will strengthen SNAP. It will the base SNAP benefit allotments will be adjusted, and it'll boost SNAP benefits for families with children forced to choose between food and shelter. So it'll also boost SNAP benefits for older Americans. And so, yeah, we like supporting SNAP in this coalition. Then the Access to Nutrition Act addresses the able bodies adults without dependents time limit. Also, something that's difficult to say. Lots of things in Congress are tongue twisters, which, yeah, I don't know why they do that. Maybe it's on purpose. But it basically lifts SNAP's arbitrary 3-month time limit to ensure that all eligible people have access to nutritionist assistance and are able to eat food that they want. Next, we have the Enhanced Access to SNAP Act, which addresses barriers in place that prevent immigrants with legal status from accessing SNAP benefits. It eliminates the 5-year barrier, which is like basically a 5-year waiting period for access to SNAP and other federal programs, and restores eligibility. Although actually I'm wrong, sorry. The Enhanced Access to SNAP Act addresses SNAP access for lower income college students, because college students are often dependents still, so they are not able to file and get SNAP on their own. But we know that college students are often supporting themselves. And then the Lift the Bar Act of 2021 addresses the barriers that around folks that are immigrants, which, yeah, just makes it easier for folks to get food. So again, looking at this pie chart, nutrition is a huge part of the marker bill, or of the farm bill. There is a lot of money in the nutrition title, and so we want to support these bills that are making it easier for folks to access healthy food, right? That is the bar for nutrition.
Sweet. Yes, and stay tuned because we will have some more in-depth trainings on those marker bills from our wonderful nutrition folks who are part of this coalition. So we'll have some dates coming up for that. So we want to, when we know we're coming up on time, we want to have a few minutes for questions, but we want to mention the Inflation Reduction Act, and which was passed last month, and how it relates to the Farm Bill. You can see, it's aimed to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, very similar to the Agricultural Resiliency Act. And it allocated a whole bunch of money to the USDA to focus on those exact programs that they are calling for funding for through the ARA. $20 billion in additional funding for conservation programs like CSP and CRP that I mentioned before. So Inflation Reduction Act, it's a big deal, and it's a good setup for Farm Bill, which I'll mention in a second. But it also left a lot of folks hanging, and there's people who are quite upset with how the politics played out and with the final bill. So because of Joe Manchin's holdup of other previous versions of this bill, and because of the legal holdup in how the Black Farmer Relief Program has been kind of held up in court, there was changes made to a debt relief that had been promised to distressed farmers who hold USDA direct or guaranteed loans. So there was $3 billion allocated to the distressed farmers in this program, and $2 billion for farmers who've experienced discrimination in USDA lending. But that is for any farmer of any race who's experienced discrimination, and it's less money than the $4 billion, which had been included in the American Rescue Plan, that was specifically intended to aid 15,000 BIPOC producers who received loans from the federal government or had bank loans guaranteed by the USDA. So really, the IRA kind of rewrote this Black Farmer Relief Program to circumvent legal objections that had held that program up in court. and to get around politics. So there's lots of folks are not happy with that, but there are aspects of this bill that are good, these climate aspects. So, but now we have to pay attention. It's not all over. Just because these things are promised, we still need to advocate for them. So even though the president has now signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, the work to really unlock the full potential of this funding and it's fully, the potential transformational investments that it has in there, the now is kind of beginning to make sure that that funding still stays in there, because ensuring successful implementation means that we need to continue to advocate that that funding is put towards what it was intended to do. So the process through which USDA will seek to implement this funding and IRA are still kind of coming into focus, including whether or not the department will initiate a formal rulemaking process. And that process notwithstanding, we need this kind of implementation of IRA to be transparent, inclusive, and ultimately be implemented in a way that achieves the outcomes that is desired to do. The scope of the implementation process, as well as the longevity of funding, will be influenced by the 2023 reauthorization of the Farm Bill. Because IRA provides new program funding for fiscal years 2023 to 2026. So when the 118th Congress begins writing the 2023 Farm Bill, the vast majority of the IRA funds will not yet have been spent. So this Congress now is allocating some money from it, but the next Congress will have the door open to it to rescind some or all of the IRA funding and reallocate it elsewhere within the Farm Bill because it's allocated towards those programs. So whether or not Congress chooses to do this may come down to political will. And if they do, the outcomes of rescission and reallocation will really be determined by 2022 midterm elections. So midterm elections matter, and the IRA is just another reason that we have all this money promised, but it could be changed if they want to do that through the development of the Farm Bill. So that's why we mention it, and it's kind of high level policy that we're very thankful for the National Sustainable Ag Coalition and being able to translate for us and keep a pulse on.
So that is our brief introduction. There are lots of ways for folks to get involved. You can connect with your Congress members, you can lend your voice to campaigns like us, but I know we have some out-of-state folks, so look for groups in your state that are doing this advocacy, or start your own and find other farmers and food advocates and folks that care about these issues to be in community with and do advocacy with, because it is a lot easier with other people. Again, there are hearings and farm tours and listening sessions and comment periods. So it's hard to do, but like try and stay in touch with your legislator and just see what opportunities there are. Again, participating in research and evaluation projects that demonstrate the effectiveness if you are using any of these programs. And of course, keeping racial equity in the front of our minds is super, super important when we are thinking about advocacy work. And then another cool opportunity is participating in the USDA grant review committees, which just is a way to help do that, because if you are reviewing the grant and have equity in the front of your brain, that is one less person that isn't going to put equity in mind when they are reviewing grants. I think Jalen is putting those links in the chat. Thank you. So we really would love more folks to join our coalition. Reach out. I will put our email in the chat. If you're not on our listserv, I promise it is not the kind of listserv that you're bombarded with emails every day. But yeah, we stay in touch about these things, send information about when we can connect with legislators, and we also, as a group, meet with legislators. And so it can be very scary to call your representative by yourself. I definitely don't like doing that. I have phone phobia, but it's much easier to hop on a Zoom with 8 other people from my district who are really passionate about these issues and hearing everyone talk about their area of expertise. So I highly encourage y'all to do that. You can participate in our more in-depth trainings this fall. So again, stay on our listserv so that you can hear, and you can also become a member. And I will put that link in the chat as well. But you don't have to be a member to come to these trainings, obviously. But yeah, we have 6 minutes. Do we want to open it up for
And real quick,
questions?
I added in just to add context for where we're on the process. So so there are hearings. There was just a hearing this morning. The Senate Agriculture Committee held one, so they're still holding hearings. They're also taking feedback. So we put some links in there where you can give your feedback on the last Farm Bill now. So they're taking in that information, and then post-election, we will see, the makeup of the House and the Senate, and we'll see the new makeup of these committees. And then they will really, in earnest, start to work to put out their drafts and start to move those drafts through the committees. So we will continue to see some marker bills introduced this fall and winter around sustainable agriculture priorities and nutrition priorities. And so we'll be including those in our upcoming training. So yeah, get plugged in. Like Brett said, we'll be sharing information out. We'll share more trainings, and you all get out there and do some election advocacy, because that's the biggest next step is the election, and then Farm Bill will start to really move forward in earnest. So yeah, we have 5 minutes. Maybe let's stop recording, Brett, and then we can see if there's any questions from folks.